Hello, great brethren. How are you doing today? Today, we are actually going to read from I Bury My Heart in Wounded Knee. I have a little bit of highlights, but we're going to get as much of this chapter as possible through. And this is actually different from Red Cloud War book. So, I told you I was going to present it, told you I was going to research it. Here we go. So, chapter 6, Red Cloud War, and this is from I Bury My Heart in Wounded Knee. Check out the book. Good book. 1866, March 27th, President Johnson vetoes Civil Rights Bill. April 1st, Congress overrides the presidential veto of the Civil Rights Bill and gives equal rights to all persons born in the United States except Indians. So, your president has what's called a pocket veto or presidential veto. So if you guys don't know that, you do now. And Congress has to actually, they have the right to override that, but they need what's 3/4 majority at this time. And they actually overturned it. And so who are the so-called Indians? Well, some look just like your relatives, so-called black men that are actually listening to this. Now, I don't know when you're listening, but the 14th Amendment still kept different privileges and immunities on the books, which allowed your states to actually interact, strip away different rights that were guaranteed, and maintain equity policies, black codes, peonage, and immunities. And these different immunities and things of that nature were actually put in place to strip away land by giving such land to tenant farmers. Who were said tenant farmers? Well, they were peasants that were undergirded by United States government, so-called white people. So the 14th Amendment, you need to be looking at it very differently than you do right now. You need to look at it from a constitutional perspective and a historical perspective. Don't just listen to what they say to you. You have to really read the subtext and listen to the words that are actually written in the 14th Amendment. Okay? Yes, I know they say equal protection clause. I know that's in the 14th Amendment. All right? But you got to really read it because they still kept those different laws on the books. Whereas you have what's called in law ex post facto. For you guys who don't know what that means after the fact. It's just simple Latin. So ex post facto means that anything that actually occurs after that law is actually put into place is what it is. For instance, let's say I say, it's illegal now for you to walk your dog on the street and have him actually urinate on someone's grass. That's illegal. Now, before, if you got ticketed for doing that before that law was passed, I mean, you don't have to pay it. But if you have to pay it now, like after laws passed, yeah, you have to pay it now because it's now in existence. But before it wasn't a crime. Now it is. You get it? All right. So the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution gives Negroes the right of citizenship. Now let's go forward. Okay, keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. All right, let's make sure that's recording. Yep. So let's keep on going, keep on going. All right, almost there. So this basically just talks about this. It's this deep. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, here we go. Getting into it. This is a big chapter. So let's go to the notes. Okay. All right. Yep. So this is During the next few weeks, as Carrington's wagon train moved north along the Bozeman Road, the Indians had the opportunity to appraise its size and strength. The 200 wagons were loaded to the bows with mowing machines, shingle and brick machines, wooden doors, window sashes, locks, nails, musical instruments for a 25-piece band, rocking chairs, churns, canned goods, vegetable seeds, as well as usual ammunition, gunpowder, and other military supplies. The Bluecoats evidently expected to stay in Powder River County. A number of them had brought their wives and children along, with an assortment of pets. So, what does that mean? Women are often used as stopgaps and supposedly civilizers of soldiers' genocidal tendencies. So they're often brought in once you are ready to settle a county, area, country, or land. Okay? That's what that means. And I believe these Native Indigenous people knew that. And servants. Who are the servants? I wonder. They were armed with absolute muzzle loaders and a few breech-loading Spencer carbines, and were supported by 4 pieces of artillery for guides that had secured the service of Blanket Jim Bridger and Medicine Calf Beckworth, who knew the Indians were watching daily progress of the trains along Powder River Road. So they were starting to bring in gats and things to actually settle in and grow and, and build to settle. Yes. But they had made agreements. Again, this book talks about all the breach treaties that actually, well, not all of them, because you can't get all of them, but it talks about a lot of breach treaties. Okay? And we're headed to breach treaties in a second. So, the Bluecoats pitched their army tents and began building Fort Phil Kearny. 3 days later, a large party of Cheyennes approached the encampment of Two Moon, Black Horse, and Doe Knife were among the leaders. So this gets into the beginning of the breach treaty, because it always happens. Okay. So Doe Knife insisted that he had. So other chiefs had been chided him severely for remaining at Fort Laramie and signing the paper which gave the soldiers permission to build forts and open the Powder River Road. Doe Knife insisted that he had touched a pen at Laramie to obtain presents of blankets and ammunition, and he did not know what was written on the paper. Why are you signing a contract then, brother? Yet the others rebuked him for doing this after Red Cloud had turned his back on the white men. And he was right for doing so, because they were about to breach this treaty. So, let's keep on going. Disdaining their presence and gathering his warriors to defy them. Under the truce flags, the Cheyenne arranged a parley with Little White Chief Carrington. 40 chiefs and warriors were given permission to visit the soldier camp. Carrington met with them, the military band, and had brought them all the way to Fort Kearny, Nebraska, entertaining the Indians with spirited martial music. Blanket Jim Bridger was there, and they knew they could not fool that Blanket. They knew that they did not fool Little White Chief into believing they had come to talk of peace. They not come to talk of peace. While the pipe smoking and preliminary speeches were going on, the chief studied the power of the soldiers. Before they were ready to depart, Little White Chief sighted one of the howitzers at the hill and exploded a spherical case shot upon it. It shot twice. Black Horse said with forced solemnity, White Chief shot once, then White Chief Great Spirit fired it once more for his white children. The power of the gun impressed the Indians as Carrington had hoped it would, but he did not suspect that Black Horse was deriding him with bland remarks about the Great Spirit firing it once more for his white children. Because he was trying to expand and settle in. So he's like, all right, your white children, huh? Okay. Next morning at dawn, the band of Red Cloud's Oglala stampeded 175 horses and mules from Carrington's herd. When the soldiers came riding in pursuit, the Indians strung them out in a 15-mile chase and inflicted the first casualties upon the Bluecoats invading the Powder River County. So basically, Bozeman Trail, they weren't supposed to go any further, but they're trying to continue to push westward and expand, breaching contracts they had previously signed in the Chapter 4. From the day all throughout the summer of 1866, Little White Chief was engaged in relentless guerrilla war. None of the numerous wagon-trained civilians or military that moved along the Bozeman Trail or road was safe from surprise attacks. Mounted escorts were spread very thin, and the soldiers soon learned to expect deadly ambushes. Soldiers assigned to cut logs a few miles from Fort Kearny were under constant and deadly harassment. As the summer wore on, the Indians developed a supply base on the Upper Powder. The grand strategy soon became apparent. Make travel on the road difficult and dangerous, and cut off supplies to Carrington's troops. Isolate them intact. Red Cloud was everywhere, and his allies increased daily. Black Bear, the Arapaho chief whose village had been destroyed by General Connor. There's that John Connor. Just joking, his name isn't John. The previous summer notified Red Cloud that his warriors were eager to join the fighting. So Sorrel Horse, another Arapaho, was brought his warriors into the alliance. Spotted Tail still believed in peace. Had gone to hunt buffalo along the Republican, but many of the Brule warriors come north to join Red Cloud. Sitting Bull was there during the summer. He later drew a pictograph of his capture of a split-eared horse from a white traveler on the Powder River Road. Gall, a young Hokapaka, was also there with a Minicocha named Hump and a young Ogala named Crazy Horse. He invented decoy tricks to taunt, infuriate, and lure soldiers into immigrants into well-laid traps. Early in August, Carrington decided that Fort Phil Kearny was strong enough to risk dividing his force again. Therefore, in accordance with the instruction from the War Department, he detached 150 men and sent them north 90 miles to build a third fort for Bozeman Road, Fort C.F. Smith. At the same time, sent scouts Bridger and Beckworth out to communicate with Red Cloud. This was a difficult assignment, but the two aging frontiersmen went in search of friendly go-betweens. In Crow Village north of Bighorn, Bridger obtained some surprising information. Although the Sioux were hereditary enemies of the Crows, they had driven them from their rich hunting grounds. Red Cloud himself had recently made a conciliatory visit to the hopes of persuading them to join the Indian Alliance. We want your aid. So, he wanted their aid in destroying the whites. Red Cloud was reported to have said the Sioux leader had boasted that he would cut off the soldiers' supplies when the snows came. Does that not sound familiar? Same strategy was actually done because they had experienced that. Okay? So Russia did that to America. Sometimes when you don't pay attention, you get trapped by the same strategies that were fishing against you. And he would starve them out of the forts and kill them all. Bridger heard rumors that the few Crows had agreed to join Red Cloud's warriors, but when he rejoined Beckworth in another Crow village, Beckworth claimed that he was enlisting Crows who were willing to join Carrington's soldiers in fighting the Sioux. Medicine Cap Beckworth never returned to Fort Phil Kearny. He died suddenly in a Crow village, possibly from poison administered by a jealous husband, more likely from natural causes. By late summer, Red Cloud had a force of 3,000 warriors. Through his friends, the Laramie Loafers, they managed to assemble a small arsenal of rifles and ammunition, but the majority of warriors still only had bows and arrows. During the early autumn, Red Cloud and the other chief agreed they must concentrate their power against the Little White Chief and the hated fort of the Pennies. And so, before the coming of the cold moons, they moved towards the Bighorn and made their camps along the headquarters of the Tongue. From there, they were easy striking distance from Fort Phil Kearny. During the summer raid, two Ogalas and High Backbone and Yellow Eagle had made names for themselves with carefully planned stratagems for tricking the soldiers, as well as reckless horsemanship and daring hand-to-hand attacks after soldiers fell into their traps. High Backbone and Yellow Eagle sometimes worked with Crazy Horse in planning the elaborate decoys. Tantalizing the woodcutters in the Piney and soldiers guarding the wagons which brought the wood to Fort Phil Kearny. They were cutting wood down so they can actually build forts up and homes. Okay? Again, because they brought their wives and kids in because they were trying to settle that area. On December 6th, a day with cold wash of air flowing down the slopes of Bighorn's High Backbone, that is an awful name, High Backbone and Yellow Eagle, took about 100 warriors and dispersed them in various points along the Pinery Road. Red Cloud, with another group of warriors who took positions along the ridge tops, they flashed mirrors and waved flags to signal the movements of the troops to High Backbone and decoys. Before the day was over, the Indians and the Bluecoats dashing about in all directions. At one time, the little white chief Carrington came out and gave chase. Choosing just the right moment, Crazy Horse dismounted and showed himself on the trail in front of Carrington's hot-blooded young cavalry officers, who immediately led a file of soldiers galloping in pursuit. As soon as the soldiers were strung out along the narrow trail, Yellow Eagle and his warriors sprang from concealment. There you go. That's where you get some of your military tactics with the ghillie suits and the guerrilla stratagems of war. In the rear, in a matter of seconds, the Indians swarmed over the soldiers. This was the fight in which Lieutenant Horatio Bingham and Sergeant G.R. Bowers were killed and several soldiers severely wounded. In their camps that night and for several days following, the chief and warriors talked about how foolishly the Bluecoats had acted. Red Cloud was sure that he could entice a large number of troops out of their fort. 1,000 Indians armed with only bows and arrows could kill them all. Sometimes during the week, the chief agreed that they would, after coming of the next full moon, and they prepared a great trap for the little white chief and his soldiers. By the third week of December, everything was in readiness, and about 2,000 warriors began moving south out of the lodges along the tongue. The weather was very cold. They were wearing buffalo robes, and their hair turned in, legs of dark woolen cloth, high-top buffalo fur moccasins, and carried red Hudson's Bay blanket straps to their saddles. Most of them rode pack horses, leading them fast-footed war ponies by Lorraines. Some had rifles, but most were armed with bows and arrows, knives, and lances. They carried enough PEMMICAN to last several days. I don't know what that is. And when the opportunity offered, small groups would turn off the trail, kill a deer, and take such meat as they could be carried on their saddles. About 10 miles north of Fort Phil Kearny, they made temporary camps in 3 circles of Sioux, Cheyennes, Arapahoes. Between the camp, the fort was a place selected to ambush the little valley of Pinot Creek. On the morning of December 21st, the chiefs and medicine man decided the day was favorable for victory. In the first gray light of dawn, a party, they should have done it on the 25th, a warrior started off in a wide circuit towards the wood train road, where they would make a feint against the wagons. 10 young men had already been chosen for the dangerous duty of decoys of the soldiers, 2 Cheyennes, 2 Arapahoes, 2 of which 3 Sioux divisions, Ogal, Minnecoes, and Brules. Crazy Horse, Hump, and Little Wolf were the leaders. While the decoys mounted and started off towards Lodge Trail Ridge, the main body of warriors moved towards Bozeman Road. Patches of snow and ice lay among the shady sides of the ridges, but the day was bright and the air cold and dry. About 3 miles from the fort, the road ran along a narrow ridge and descended to Pinot Creek. They lay great ambush. The Cheyennes and Arapahoes took the west side. Some of the Sioux hid in a grassy flat on the side. Others remained mounted and concealed themselves behind 2 rocky ridges. By mid-morning, amongst 2,000 warriors were waiting there as decoys when the Bluecoats were arriving into the trap. While the war party was making its feint against the wood train, Crazy Horse and the decoys dismounted and waited in concealment on the slope facing the fort. At the first sight of gunfire, the company of soldiers dashed out of the fort and galloped off to rescue the woodcutters. As soon as the bluecoats were out of sight, the decoys showed themselves on the slope and moved down closer to the fort. Crazy Horse waved his red blanket and darted in and out of the brush and fringed the frozen piney. After a few minutes of this, the little soldier chief in the fort fired big twice shooting gun. The decoy scattered along the slope, jumping, zigzagging, and yelling to make the soldier believe they were frightened. But this time the war party had withdrawn from the wood train and doubled back towards the lodge trail. In a few minutes, the soldiers came in pursuit, some mounted, some on foot. They were commanded by Captain William J. Fetterman, who had explicit orders not to pursue beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. Crazy Horse and other decoys now jumped on their ponies and began riding back and forth along the slope of Lodge Trail Ridge, taunting the soldiers and angering them so that they would fire recklessly. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks and the decoys moved back slowly. When the soldiers would slow their advance or halted, Crazy Horse would dismount and pretend to adjust the bridle or example of his pony hooves. Bullets whined all around him, and then the soldiers finally moved up the ridgetop to chase the decoys towards Pinot Creek. There were the only Indians in sight, only 10 of them, and the soldiers were charging their horses to catch them. When the decoys crossed Pinot Creek, all 81 of the cavalrymen and infantrymen were within the trap. Now the decoys divided into two parties and quickly rode across each other's trail. This was a signal for attack. Little Big Horse and Cheyenne, who a year earlier gave warnings to the Arrows of General Connor's approach, had the honor of signaling the people who were concealed in the gullies on the west side. The west side. He raised his lance, and all the mounted Cheyennes and Arrows charged with a sudden thunder of hooves. From the opposite side came the Sioux, and for a few minutes the Indians and the walking soldiers were mixed in confusing hand-to-hand fighting. The infantrymen were soon all killed, but the cavalrymen retreated to the rocky height near the end of the ridge. They turned their horses loose and tried to take cover along the ice-crusted boulders. Little Horse had made a name for himself that day, leaping over the rocks and in and out the gullies until he was within 40 feet of the besieged cavalrymen. White Bull, the Minicoge, also distinguished himself in the bloody fighting of the hillside. Armed with only a bow and lance, he charged, dismounting the cavalrymen who were fighting him with a carbine. In a pictograph with White Bull later drew of the event, he showed himself clad in red war cape, firing an arrow into the soldier's heart and cracking him over the head with a lance to count the first coup. Towards the end of the fighting, Cheyennes and Arrows on one side and the Sioux on the other were so close together that they began hitting each other with their shoulders of arrows. Then it was all over. Not a soldier was left alive. A dog came out from among the dead, and the Sioux started to catch it and take it home with them. But the big rascal, a Cheyenne, said, "Don't let the dog go," and somebody shot it with the arrow. This was the fight the white men called the Fetterman Massacre, and Indians called the Battle of the 100 Slain. Casualties were heavy among the Indians, almost 200 dead and wounded. Because of the intense cold, they decided to take the wounded back to a temporary camp where they could be kept from freezing. Next day, a roaring blizzard trapped the warriors there in the improvised shelters. When the storm abated, they went back to their villages on the tongue. Now it was the moon of the strong cold, and there were to be no more fighting for a while. The soldiers who were left alive in the fort would have a bitter taste of defeat in their mouth. They had not learned their lesson, and they still were. When the grass greened in the spring, the war would continue. The Fetterman Massacre made a profound impression upon the Colonel Carrington, who was appalled by the mutilations, the disembowelments, and the hacked limbs, and the private parts severed and indecently placed on the person. He brooded upon the reasons for such savagery and eventually wrote an essay on the subject, philosophizing that Indians were compelled by some paganistic belief to commit the terrible deeds that remain forever in his mind. Had Colonel Carrington visited the scene of the Sand Creek Massacre, which occurred only 2 years before the Fetterman Massacre, he would have seen the same mutilations committed upon Indians by Colonel Chivington's soldiers. The Indians who ambushed Fetterman were only intimidating the enemies, a practice which, in warfare as a civilian life, is said to be the serious form of flattery. The Fetterman Massacre also made a profound impression on the United States government. It was the worst defeat the Army had yet suffered in Indian warfare. That's not true. And the second in American history from which came no survivors. That's also not true. Carrington was recalled from his command, reinforcements were sent to the forts of Powder River country, and the new Peace Commission was dispatched to Washington to Fort Laramie, Maine. The new commission was headed by Black Whiskers John Sanborn, who in 1865 had persuaded Black Kettle Southern Cheyennes to give up their hunting grounds in Kansas and live below the Arkansas River. Sanborn and General Alfred Sully arrived in Fort Laramie, Maine in 1867, and their mission at the time was to persuade Red Cloud and Sioux to give up their hunting grounds at Powder River. Little Wound and Pawnee Killer, who had brought their Oglala bands down to the Platte in hopes of finding buffalo, came to see the kind of present commissioners might be handing out. The man afraid of his horse arrived in as a representative for Red Cloud. When the commissioner asked him if Red Cloud was coming to talk peace, Man Afraid replied the Oglala leader would not talk about peace until all soldiers were removed from the Powder River country. During these parleys, Sanborn asked Spotted Tail to address the assembly Indians. Spotted Tail advised his listeners to abandon warfare with white men and live in peace and happiness. Doesn't that sound familiar? For this, he and Bruce received enough powder and led to go off a buffalo hunt to the Republican River. The hostile Oglalas received nothing. Man Afraid returned to join Red Cloud, who had already resumed raiding along the Bozeman Road. Little Wound and Pawnee Killer found the rules to Buffalo Rangers, joining their old Cheyenne friends. Turkey Leg, Black Whisker Sanborn Peace Commission had accomplished nothing. Before the summer was done, Pawnee Killer and Turkey Leg became involved with Soldier Chief, who had named Hard Backside because he chased them over long distances for many hours without leaving his saddle. In the search for buffalo and antelope, the Oglalas and Cheyenne crossed the railroad tracks several times. That summer, sometimes they saw iron horses dragging wooden houses on wheels at great speed along the tracks. They puzzled over what could be inside the houses, and one day a Cheyenne decided to rope one of the iron horses and pull it from the tracks. Instead, the iron horse jerked him off the pony and dragged him unmercifully before he could get loose from the lariat. It was a sleeping rabbit who suggested that they try another way to catch one of these iron horses. I guess as a train, it could bend the track up and spread it out. All right. The Indians killed all but two, who escaped and ran away. The Indians broke open the houses on the wheels and found sacks of flour, sugar, and coffee, boxes and shoes, and barrels of whiskey. They drank some of the whiskey and began tying the ends of the bolts of cloth to their ponies' tails. The ponies went dashing off across the prairie on long streamers of cloth, unrolling the flying. Okay, so they took the wrecked engines and set boxcars on fire. They rode away before soldiers could come and punish them. Incidents like this, combined with Red Cloud's continual war, which had brought civilian travel to an end through the Powder River country, had strong effect on the United States government and its high military command. The government was determined to protect the route to Union Pacific Railroad. Okay, remember we talked about the expansion of the railroad system, okay, at which they were trying to get taxable money from Confederate states, okay. But even old war dogs such as General Sherman were beginning to wonder if it might not be advisable to leave the Powder River country to the Indians in exchange for peace along with Platte Valley. Later that July, after holding their Sundance and Medicine Arrow ceremonies, Sioux and Cheyennes decided to wipe out one of the forts on the Bozeman Road. Red Cloud wanted to attack Fort Phil Kearny, but Doe Knife and Two Moon thought it would be easier to take C.F. Smith because the Cheyenne warriors already had killed and captured nearly all the soldiers' horses there. Finally, the chiefs would reach no agreement. The Sioux said they would attack Fort Phil Kearny, and the Cheyennes went north to Fort C.F. Smith. So the Cheyennes caught 30 soldiers, civilians, in Hayfield, about 2 miles of Fort C.F. Smith. They had repeating rifles. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So the soldiers said afterward, when arriving within 20 feet of the barricade, it stopped and thought arrested by a supernatural power. The flames arose to a perpendicular height of at least 40 feet, made one of two undaunting movements that were extinguished with a spanking snap or slap. The flapping sound around the heavy canvas in the hard gale, the winds in succeeding instant carried the smoke into the face of the attacking Indians. So basically, Shine's like, that's enough for me. Okay. So we only have a little bit more left. Let's get through this. So on November 9th, when Commissioner arrived at Fort Laramie, they only found about 2 Crow chiefs waiting to meet with them. The Crows were friendly, but one of them, Beartooth, made a surprising speech in which he condemned all white men for their reckless destruction of wildlife and natural environment. Fathers, 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 hear me. Well, call back to your young men. So he's paternalistic, and there's quite a bit of Native American tribes that are paternalistic. They killed most of those tribes off, and they forced them to join different tribes that were mostly paternalistic, which they enrich a lot of those women that were maternalistic in general, those tribes and those women. Fathers, your young men have devastated the country and killed many animals, the elk, the deer, the antelope, and buffalo. They do not kill them to eat them. They leave them to rot where they fall. Fathers, I went into your country to kill your animals. What would you say? Should I not be wrong? And would you make war on me? A few days after the commissioner meeting with the Crows, messenger arrived from Red Cloud. He would come to Laramie to talk peace. He informed the commissioners as soon as the soldiers were withdrawn from the forts of Powder River Road, the war, he repeated, was being fought for one purpose: to save the valleys of the Powder. Only hunting grounds left his nation from intrusion by white men. The Great Father sent his soldiers out here to spill blood. I did not first commence the spilling of blood. The Great Father sent white men out to my country. Peace will last forever, but if they disturb me, there will be no peace. For the third time in 2 years, the Peace Commission had failed before the commission returned to Washington. However, they sent Red Cloud a shipment of tobacco with another plea to come to Laramie as soon as the winter snows melted in the spring. Red Cloud politely replied that he had received tobacco of peace and would smoke it, and he would come to Laramie as soon as the soldier had left his country. In the spring of '68, Great Warrior Sherman and the same Peace Commission returned to Fort Laramie. This time they had firm orders from an impatient government to abandon the forts of Powder River Road and obtain a peace treaty with Red Cloud. This time they sent a special agent from the Indian Bureau to personally invite the Oglala leader to a peace signing. Red Cloud told the agent he would need about 10 days to consult with his allies. It would probably come to Laramie during the moon when the pony shed. Only a few days later, the agent returned to Laramie. However, a message arrived from Red Cloud. We are on the mountains looking down on the soldiers and the forts. When we see the soldiers moving away and the forts are abandoned, I will come down and talk. This was all very humiliating and embarrassing to the great warrior Sherman and the commissioners. They managed to obtain the signatures of a few minor chiefs who came in for presents, but as the days passed, the frustrated commission quietly departed one by one for the east. By the late spring, only Black Whiskers Sanborn and White Whiskers Harney were left to negotiate, but Red Cloud and his allies remained on the Powder through the summer, keeping a close watch on the forts in the Road Montana. At the last, reluctant War Department issued orders for abandonment of Powder River country. On July 29th, the troops at Fort C.F. Smith packed their gear and started marching southward. Early the next morning, Red Cloud led a band celebrating warriors into the post. They set fire to every building. A month later, Fort Phil Kearny was abandoned, and the honor of burning was given to the Cheyennes under Little Wolf. A few days after that, the last soldier departed from Fort Reno, and Powder River Road was officially closed. After 2 years of resistance, Red Cloud had won his war. For a few more weeks, he kept the treaty markers waiting. Then on November 6th, surrounded by a coterie of triumphant warriors, he came riding to the Fort Landmaine, now conquering hero. He would sign the treaty. From the day forward, all war between the parties to this agreement shall forever cease. The government of the United States desires peace, and its honor is hereby pledged to keep. The Indians desire peace, and they now pledge to honor and maintain it. For the next 20 years, however, the contents of the other 16 articles of that treaty of 1868 will remain a matter of dispute between the Indians and the government of the United States. What many of the chiefs understood was in the treaty was actually written therein after Congress ratified it were like two horses whose correlations did not match. Spotted Tail 9 years later, these promises have not been kept. All the words have been proved to be false, as per usual. There was a treaty made by General Sherman and General Sanborn and General Harney. At the time, the generals told us that they would have annuities and goods from the treaty for 35 years. He said this, but he didn't tell the truth. How common is that? And there we go. Sorry for taking 40 minutes, but maybe I might go into chapter 7 some other day. But this is the end of Red Cloud's War. Hope you enjoyed. I'm out, bros.